8 years ago, I made a shitpost recommending some movies to watch on Halloween. I mentioned some good and some really bad films. In that video, I highlighted Ginger Snaps as being my favorite to watch during this season. And since it's Halloween again, I decided, that film deserves its own video. So here we are. Spoilers ahead. Ginger Snaps is a Canadian film from 2000, written by Karen Walton and directed by John Fawcett. It's about a high school girl who gets bitten by a werewolf and begins transforming into one. Meanwhile, her sister tries to find a cure. Every October, I like to revisit this film. To me, it's almost the perfect Halloween movie, though I understand it's not for everyone. I honestly haven't heard a lot of hype around it, and the title certainly doesn't do it any favors. When you Google Ginger Snaps, you'll get information about the film, as well as a bunch of cookie recipes. I wasn't even entirely sure what Ginger Snaps was about before I watched it for the first time. So I didn't really have any expectations going in, but after watching it, I was impressed with it overall. Now I think it's an underrated gem. Because it uses lycanthropy as a metaphor for female puberty and explores other themes around womanhood, it's definitely more feminist than most other horror movies. Despite its feminist themes, however, I think it's accessible for most horror-loving audiences, especially those who are interested in a biological spin on werewolf lore.
Biology. There's something you can sink your teeth into.
I don't identify as a feminist, and I still love the film. The main reasons being for the performances, the practical effects, the body horror, the dark humor, and the overall Halloween mood. The majority of Ginger Snaps is a countdown to Halloween, leading up to the next full moon after Ginger gets attacked by a werewolf, with the climax of her complete transformation taking place on Halloween night. Some criticisms of this film have been that the puberty metaphor was too obvious, the character is too over the top, especially the mother, and the dark humor and horror elements unbalanced. I think these are valid criticisms to have because everyone's experience of a film is subjective.
That's just like your opinion, man.
However, subjectively, I don't think these criticisms make the film a worse experience. Here's why. I don't know how you can make the puberty metaphor less obvious. Puberty and turning into a werewolf are both bodily transformations, and for Ginger, they just happen at the exact same time. Or I suppose it was the blood from her first period that attracted the werewolf and triggered her attack. Perhaps the timing of both of these events happening together seems too coincidental, but I think it works well for the pacing of the story.
I just got the curse.
Maybe the puberty metaphor is too obvious for these two critics, who are both men, by the way. I don't know if that means anything, but I wanted to mention it anyway. But being obvious isn't necessarily a bad thing in film. Carrie did the same metaphor in 1976, coinciding her first period with discovery of her telekinetic powers, and that film still holds up as being a revered classic in horror cinema. The metaphor for the dangers and consequences of sex in It Follows is also blatantly obvious, but it didn't worsen the experience of the film for me personally. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine. But I think you can portray obvious metaphors and still have a good film, as long as the other elements do their part to keep you invested in the story and in the characters. When it comes to the characters, I don't think they were too over the top either. High school girls are mean, high school boys are horny, and sometimes parents are oblivious. Even though everyone in the supporting cast was mostly one-dimensional, I thought they were sufficient for the plot. The high school kids in The Craft and even the school staff in Carrie were more over the top in my opinion. The guidance counselor was probably the most cartoonish character to me, but I thought she was funny and actually very informative about menstruation. Honestly, I've never heard anyone else explain it so vividly before, and I appreciate her candidness.
Play safe.
I also thought that Mimi Rogers was great as Ginger and Bridget's mother. She provided a bright and sunny contrast to her doom and gloom daughters, and even though she was a bit animated, she wasn't overbearing. I think we got just enough of her presence without it being too annoying.
What are these?
Monk's Hood. Bridget,
Where'd you get them?
from a craft store.
I also thought that the dark humor balanced well with the horror elements, a lot better than in another film that I'll mention later. Real life is often an intersection and overlap of multiple emotions. It can be humorous and horrifying at the same time, or happy and sad at the same time, i.e. bittersweet moments. The ending of the film, for example, I think has a fitting balance of being both positive and devastating. Bridget kills the fully transformed Ginger before she can hurt anyone else, the last victim being Sam, who was very unlucky in this film. By killing Ginger, Bridget not only saves everyone from becoming werewolf chow, but she also frees herself from her codependent and, you could even say, destructive relationship with her dominant older sister. It's the only moment in the film when Bridget successfully overpowers Ginger. Sure, Bridget stands up to Ginger a few times in the film, but she's always dismissed or beat down by Ginger anyway. Even though Ginger's death is a win in the sense that she was a dangerous man-eating monster, It's also a devastating loss for Bridget. She had to kill the only person she loved in order to save her own and everyone else's life. The first time I watched this movie, I thought she made a mistake by plunging the knife instead of the needle into Ginger. But after watching it again this year, perhaps Bridget realized by the end of the film that even if she could cure Ginger with the monk's hood, she knew Ginger would never be the same as before she was bitten. Perhaps Bridget thought that she was past the point of saving Ginger's humanity, and that it was more merciful to give her death. In a 2017 interview with Offscreen, writer Karen Walton explains that Ginger and Bridget's relationship was bound to end even if they never encountered the werewolf. She states, "They have a suicide pact which grows from their mentality of a long-standing arrangement to survive something together, but in the story of the movie, that relationship itself becomes the #1 threat to their existence. All that is a part of growing up and releasing yourself from some contracts that should not be upheld. Bridget had to say goodbye to Ginger, but I'm sure she would not have chosen these terms." So maybe you could interpret that Bridget subconsciously held the knife out a little bit more than the needle because she wanted to protect herself and get out of her destructive relationship with Ginger. I don't know, it's something to think about. When it comes to the dialogue and tone, I think dark humor works well with teenage protagonists. Teenagers are always going to be edgy and unfiltered with each other. That's just the way they are. Especially antisocial teens like Bridget and Ginger, who are obsessed with death and are talking about their plans for suicide at the beginning of the film. When the elements of horror get added to the mix, it can have the effect of heightening the humor and then twisting it into something more frightening. A scene that stands out to me is when Jason, the boy who Ginger has sex with and affects with her lycanthropic STD, is peeing blood at school. As his pee stream becomes increasingly more red, his screams intensify. Maybe it's just my sick sense of humor, but I always laugh at this scene.
You had unprotected sex and you infected him. Oops.
Something about toilet humor intersecting with body horror is amusing to me, I guess. It also becomes more funny because Jason tries to pass off the blood as being from an exploded red pen.
What are you looking at, huh? My pen exploded, okay? My red pen.
It's like, dude, you're probably dying, yet you're still too embarrassed to admit that a concerning amount of blood just came out of your penis? But I guess that just shows how much pressure there is to be accepted in high school. Another scene that's kind of funny and horrific to me is before the opening credits. When the mother and child discover that their dog was killed by the beast of Bailey Downs, no one gives a shit. Even the kid who was in the yard with the dead dog looks bored while playing in its blood. The neighborhood kids who are outside are kind of just like,
"Oh, really? That sucks."
And then they go right back to playing hockey. If there were adults outside who reacted this way, it would be way more fucked up. But because they're kids showing apathy, I think it makes sense. Like, what are they gonna do about it? Also, it gives the audience the sense that the beast has been killing dogs for a while, and by now, the community is desensitized to the attacks.
Beast of Bailey Downs strikes again.
That's 4 dogs this week.
Even though I praise this movie up and down, of course, this is not a perfect film. There are some things that stand out as just making no goddamn sense to me, and they're done in a way that's just to add dramatic effect or shock value. Like, how did you not fucking notice that your dog was mangled in your yard? Did you not check on him earlier in the day? How did Ginger and Bridget get Trina into the freezer so quickly without making a bigger mess around the house? Also, the dog corpse that was on the field when they were in PE. How the fuck did no one see a large dead dog before Bridget fell on it? Or did they notice and just decide it would be okay to have a hockey game next to it? Either they're all short-sighted or they don't care about playing around dead animals. Who's responsible for the landscaping at the school anyway? Are they high? Oh, right. Also, this child actor sucks. I don't believe for a second he's in any danger at all. Despite these flaws, I obviously still enjoy the film overall, and there's just one more thing I want to mention before ending this video. Do you remember a 2009 American horror comedy called Jennifer's Body? Most of you are probably more familiar with that film than with Ginger Snaps. However, both movies are near identical in plot, character dynamic and motivation, tone, and themes. I mentioned this in my original shitpost, and I'm still not done talking about it. I think it's an injustice that Jennifer's Body is a near copy of Ginger Snaps, yet Jennifer's Body has more recognition and arguably more success than the Canadian film that came out first, 9 years before Jennifer's Body. The writers of Jennifer's Body, Diablo Cody and Karen Kusama, have never said that they were inspired by Ginger Snaps when writing Jennifer's Body, and I think that's bullshit. I believe it's possible that there's a chance that neither one of them had seen or heard of Ginger Snaps before working on Jennifer's Body, but then it's a huge coincidence that there are so many similarities between the two films. And I don't know if I believe that Diablo Cody, who claims to be a big horror fan and a feminist, has not seen or at least heard of Ginger Snaps once before writing Jennifer's Body.
Not once.
I'm not the only one who thinks so either. There are multiple online articles and a thread on Our Horror specifically about whether or not Jennifer's Body is a ripoff of Ginger Snaps. Most people agree that it is, and people on the internet are always right. Sure, there are high school teen drama tropes that are shared by both movies, and countless others, but there's so many of the same plot points and beats that it's impossible to imagine that the writers of Jennifer's Body didn't take notes from Ginger Snaps. I know that when it comes to art, there's nothing new under the sun, but come on, it's just too wild of a coincidence. In the off-screen interview with Karen Walton, she said that she and director John Fawcett, who also collaborated on the film's story, were inspired by horror films like An American Werewolf in London, the old Universal Monsters, David Cronenberg films, and Dead Ringers. Walton also said that if her script for Ginger Snaps inspired other works, like Jennifer's Body, then she's cool with it because she was inspired by other films for Ginger Snaps. At the time of that interview, Walton had not seen Jennifer's Body, but she was aware of how similar it is to Ginger Snaps. I just wish that Diablo Cody and Karen Kusama would admit that they were inspired by Ginger Snaps. But maybe it really is the case that they weren't. I just find it hard to believe.
Now that would be some fucking coincidence if it wasn't, wouldn't it?
Let's look at the facts. Both films have themes of blossoming womanhood, toxic femininity, and overcoming an evil supernatural entity. Two female codependent protagonists, one who's hot and dominant, and one who's mousy and submissive. The hot one gets attacked by a monster and transforms into something evil. The mousy one takes it upon herself to destroy the evil with little or no support from anyone else. The hot one uses her sex appeal to attract male victims. The last male victim is a close companion of the mousy one. The mousy one gets infected by the hot one's evil. The mousy one kills the hot one with a blade to the chest. Now let's look at the differences between the two films. And in my opinion, the differences make Jennifer's Body a worse film experience than Ginger Snaps. While both films are full of dark humor and horror, Jennifer's Body is a horror/comedy. Ginger Snaps has some funny moments, but it does not identify as a comedy. And for good reason. I think trying to be a comedy does a disservice to this kind of horror story. I didn't much care for Lisa Frankenstein either. Jennifer's Body cramps in so much quirky, made-up teenage lingo that it comes at the expense of not being effective at delivering something scary. The extended version especially. My god, some of these scenes, just pure cringe.
By the time they found Colin in that godforsaken house, he looked like lasagna with teeth.
Here, let me serve you bitch lasagna. Bitch lasagna, bitch lasagna.
With teeth.
They made the right call in cutting them out for the theatrical release. Jennifer's Body uses computer-generated effects for the demon transformations, which have aged worse than the late 90s practical werewolf effects in Ginger Snaps. It looks like a lot more time and care was put into the prosthetic werewolf effects in Ginger Snaps, whereas the demon effects in Jennifer's Body look kinda silly. Jennifer started out with the same mean girl persona before and after becoming a demon, which makes her transformation less impactful than Ginger's. Ginger started out as a nobody with a reputation as a freak. It wasn't until she became Wolfie that her personality changed and eventually she became drunk with power. This could help explain why it took longer for Needy to figure out what was going on with Jennifer. See, even their names sound similar. Jennifer, Ginger, Jesus. Alright, so it took longer for Needy to figure out what was going on with Jennifer, but Bridget knew pretty much right away what was happening to Ginger. Although, to be fair, Bridget was present for Ginger's attack, while Needy wasn't when Jennifer was sacrificed. Speaking of Jennifer's sacrifice, it kind of pisses me off that Needy was basically responsible for the whole thing, and she never seemed to realize or acknowledge it. It was really dumb of her to assume that telling the band Jennifer is a virgin would make them less interested in her.
That's my best friend that you're talking about. And you're right, she is a virgin. And that beats sleeping with creeps like you.
And at least Ginger Snaps understood that sleazy guys are generally more attracted to virgin girls.
He's a cherry hound. He's into virgins.
It's like claiming new territory for them or something. With Ginger and Bridget being sisters, I also felt like their relationship was a lot stronger and carried more weight. Jennifer and Needy are best friends, but I don't really buy it. In most cases, girls like Jennifer would have ditched girls like Needy by the time they got to middle school. But I guess that's part of their power dynamic. Jennifer uses Needy like a lapdog and takes her for granted, and Needy just lets her do it. You can also interpret that Jennifer is attracted to Needy, and that's why she keeps her so close. Maybe she's jealous of Colin and Chip, and that's her motivation for eating them, rather than just trying to piss off Needy, because she wants her all to herself. Also in Jennifer's Body, we meet the turds who killed Jennifer, which results in her coming back as a demon. In Ginger Snaps, we don't know anything about the werewolf that infected Ginger, and I think both scenarios work well for their respective films. It makes sense to have human villains who are responsible for Jennifer becoming a demon because demons don't just come out of nowhere. They have to be summoned by a spell or a ritual. Or maybe they don't, I don't know. But it works well for this movie. In Ginger Snaps, we don't need to know anything about the OG werewolf. I don't think it would add much substance other than slow down the pace of the main storyline. Like, we're here for Ginger, not some other guy. Last thing I'll mention, the music. Vastly different vibes here. Jennifer's Body featured a lot of pop rock songs by bands under the Fueled by Ramen label, and the way they were used I thought was either odd or fucking hilarious. And sometimes they felt downright inappropriate. But at least we got this original banger. Through the trees, I will find you. I will heal. Through it all without me. I'm still here breathing now. And I'm still here. Go quiet through the trees. The original score, composed by Theodore Shapiro and Stephen Barton for the more intense scenes, was probably the best part of the soundtrack. It was more tense and mysterious than the Fueled by Ramen shit. When Needy's running after Chip, not bad at all. I'm going to point out another one of Needy's character flaws. It was also really dumb of her not to go to the dance with Chip. It just made him more vulnerable. She's really bad at protecting people. Ginger Snaps had a more somber score composed by Mike Shields. The rest of the soundtrack, which is composed of licensed songs, is also pretty cool. The mostly industrial metal songs add to the moody, gritty atmosphere of the film. And that's another reason I think Ginger Snaps is a better horror film out of these two. Jennifer's Body looks too clean and polished by comparison, which doesn't do any favors for the tone or setting it's going for. It seems like it tries to be indie and alternative, but it just ends up looking like a pretty popular girl who went to Hot Topic in an attempt to look edgy. It's just too mainstream. Ginger Snaps, on the other hand, is dirty, unsettling, and even ugly at times. Based on what we see in both films, it feels more dangerous and unnerving to live in Bailey Downs than in Devil's Kettle. To give the benefit of the doubt to Jennifer's Body, perhaps you can view the plot, which is the same in both films, as more of a general framework, and filmmakers are free to adapt and dress up that framework into any story they want. Jennifer's Body dressed it up as a demon flick, and Ginger Snaps dressed it up as a werewolf joint. It's up to you, whichever you prefer, or maybe you don't see them as being the same at all, and this whole video is just the insane rantings of an unhinged conspiracy theorist. But seriously, they really do share the same plot, and I can't think of another film that has it. If you can, let me know, I'm curious. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Jennifer's Body. Even though I ripped it apart a bit, in all honesty, I actually enjoy watching it sometimes, as a comedy or as a guilty pleasure. It's a different film experience from Ginger Snaps, but the similarities stand out so much to me that every time I watch Jennifer's Body, there are moments where I think Ginger Snaps did that better. Suck it, Diablo Cody. Hack. I guess that's all I have to say about Ginger Snaps 2, or as well. Not Ginger Snaps 2, I haven't seen that one. I love the film, especially for Halloween, and I think it's aged well from when it first came out. It has gore, werewolves, Canadians, and TF. What more could you ask for? It's a good film to revisit every Halloween, especially now since there's this big nostalgic resurgence of everything having to do with the 90s, specifically the year 1993 for some reason. I guess that was like peak 90s Halloween era. That's the year Hocus Pocus came out. And it's also the year that a lot of these newer Halloween movies are taking place in that year. I don't know why. So Ginger Snaps. Just go check it out if you haven't seen it already. Right now it's streaming on Peacock or AMC Plus if you have that, or you could just buy it on DVD. If you want to make it a double feature, watch Jennifer's Body right after, which is also on the cock. And then come back here and let me know what you think of both films. Do you think Jennifer's Body is a ripoff, or do you think it's just a wild coincidence that they happen to be so similar? Well, that's it. Happy Halloween, stay safe, and remember to brush your teeth after eating all that candy. Otherwise, you might get cavities, which will result in a root canal, and if that fails, then you might have to get your tooth extracted like I did. All right, drink water, play safe, have fun. Bye.